And I think with that, Catherine, off we go.
All right, well, I just wanted to cover what we're going to do with the agenda today. Um, One, I wanted to welcome you. We have Andrew Walchuk here with us to talk about Louisiana v. Calais. This decision is incredibly painful, and it's important to understand its implications and to think about what are the kinds of things that we can actually do. Then continuing saga of Larry Householder, the Speaker of the House, who's now in prison. I want to let you know that the Supreme Court actually denied his appeal. Then Mia's going to talk about, what's going on with the Attorney General because we have a new one. We're also going to talk about the continuing saga of House Bill 6. And then Kelly's going to talk about voting and elections updates. We have some upcoming events, and then there's some built-in time at the end, to talk about some, general things, ask questions. And then I wanted to be super clear for many of you that attended the Calais webinar earlier in the week. This is a real opportunity to ask any of the kind of remaining questions that you had. And so we have a usually we have a fairly tight agenda. This time we have fewer things on here to permit more time to visit. So welcome to Coffee with Common Cause. And with that, Andrew.
Oh,
Oh, I forgot this.
go ahead, Catherine.
Oh, I was so happy with this was an event on May Day. And Mia helped organize it. It was just wonderful. We the people, for many of you, you know that the US Constitution is going around the state and people are signing it. It's making a loop, so it's off to Cleveland at the last stop. If you haven't had a chance to do it and it comes to your town, I highly encourage you do it. It was just a wonderful opportunity to imagine, being a founding father, to think back on, well, what is it that we actually want? And what was missing, what's missing in the US Constitution? And how have we improved it with amendments and what amendments we might actually want? Mia, do you want to tell them about the poem that you read?
Yeah, LaChandra Baker wrote an amazing poem called The New Colossus, and that is a picture of her and I reading it together. We can send a link to it in the follow-up. It really is an amazing poem, kind of calling us to account for the ways we have not lived up to our ideals, and hoping that we can do so in the future. So I highly recommend it. And now, with that, Andrew.
Thanks so much, y'all. And I am very happy to be here with you guys this morning. I am Andrew Walchuk. I am the Policy Director and Counsel for our Voting and Fair Representation team at Common Cause. And so I'm going to talk a little bit, try to give a quick overview of the decision in Louisiana versus Calais that came down a couple of weeks ago from the Supreme Court. This is really quite a disastrous decision, and it really represents the culmination of a years-long effort by the Roberts Court to undo the victories, the very hard-won victories of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And so we were very disappointed to see the result in it. Unfortunately, it was what we expected given the court's history of activity around the Voting Rights Act. But I will just quickly, before we get into the specifics of the case, I do think it's helpful to give a little bit of grounding. When we hear a lot when people talk about Calais, they talk about Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act. And so wanted to cover that again really quickly. So this is the part of the Voting Rights Act that forbids any standard practice or procedure that's going to result in the denial or abridgment of the right of any citizen to vote on account of race, color, or membership in some particular language minority groups. And so this has been the key protection that folks have relied on for years to challenge discriminatory voting laws, things that are sort of denying people the right to vote, getting in the way of the right to vote, and also for challenging racial discrimination in redistricting. It has been sort of broken apart over the years. So this sort of attack on the Voting Rights Act This really started in 2013 with the Shelby County decision from the Supreme Court. Before the Shelby County decision, many states that had a history of discrimination had to clear all of their voting laws through DOJ before those laws could go into effect. And that was called pre-clearance. And Shelby County got rid of DOJ pre-clearance and really started a flurry of activity from states around the country that were wanting to limit the vote of minorities, to begin passing laws that created new barriers and began these attacks with redistricting. Section 2, after pre-clearance, was really the way that people were able to bring these cases to court and say, this law has been passed, this is denying my right to vote, this is denying my right to have my voice heard. And that became the primary avenue for individuals and communities to challenge discrimination that they were facing. The sort of barriers to voting, things like restrictions on access to mail balloting, restrictions on placement of polling places, restrictions on early voting, all the things that we fight so hard for to increase access to voting, the Supreme Court actually already took a big bite out of people's ability to bring those claims in a previous case called Brnovich. And this was really the redistricting side of Section 2. This was the side where, people are saying that the state is trying to crack or pack our communities, so, break us up so we can't have our voice heard, or try to take all of the minorities communities and pack them into a single district so they're not affecting the other districts around us. This was their way of challenging that. So all that background on Section 2, that's how we arrived at this case, Louisiana versus Callais. So what happened in 2020 after the 2020 census? Louisiana, which is a third Black, drew their maps. They have 6 districts and only ended up with one majority Black district. And so the plaintiffs in that case back then brought a challenge saying that it was discriminating against the Black voters in the state, trying to silence their voices by, packing all of the voters into a single district when there really should have been more Black majority districts given the population of the state. And so in 2023, the Fifth Circuit, no strong friend of voting rights, actually found that there was a violation and that there was discrimination against those Black communities and ordered the drawing of a second district. So we got the map that became the sort of focal point of this case in Calais. You see those 2 central districts in the state. Those were 2 Black majority districts that the state legislature was forced to draw after the Fifth Circuit's decision. As soon as that map was drawn, we had a challenge from non-African American voters who were claiming that these new districts were discriminatory against them and that they were violating the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause, and that there should be no consideration of race in the drawing of districts. So if we can go to the next slide. The Supreme Court actually heard this case twice, that signals that they're considering sort of a major change in law. And there were a lot of parties that were asking the court to say, because the VRA because Section 2 requires the consideration of race in correcting these discriminatory districts, that is unconstitutional alone. You can't consider race, even if it is to fix racial discrimination, and therefore Section 2 of the VRA is unconstitutional, and we should overturn this. That was what many of the parties were asking the court to say. And Justice Kavanaugh, during questioning, sort of suggested that he might be aligned with these. It was a big flag for us that this might be a very bad decision. And he suggested that, race-based districting should have a time limit. This sort of argument that we often hear from the court in their dismantling of the VRA, that essentially racism is over, and that there is no more discrimination, and that the remedies of the VRA from 1965 are no longer applicable. And we all know that is absolutely not the case, but there was this sort of groundswell of support among a lot of conservative legal theorists and among the Roberts Court for that view, that very sort of rosy-eyed view of our country that we know is not true, is not a reflection of our current history. So if we can go to the next slide. And so we got the decision at the end of or earlier this month. I forget the exact day at this point. It feels like it's been a year since this came down. But they did not say that use of race altogether in remedying discrimination is unconstitutional. They did something far more insidious. They said, oh, it's okay, but you're going to have to meet these standards. And the standards are impossible for any community to meet in bringing these sorts of claims. They made it all but impossible to bring these claims and really gutted the protections of the Voting Rights Act and sort of completed this years-long, decades-long effort to undo those hard-won victories and close the courthouse door on the communities that are trying to address that discrimination. So if we can go to the next slide. And some ways that they made this impossible. Previously, due to demands of Congress and things that were passed in the law, and longstanding precedent, courts were supposed to look at the effect of a map, and they were supposed to look at effects of the discrimination rather than just trying to parse the intent. And so if the map had the effect of diluting the voting power of voters of color and prevented those voters from being able to elect a candidate of their choosing, then they were able to bring these claims. Now, due to what Justice Alito called an update, but was really actually reversing years of precedent, the courts are supposed to look at whether there is an intent to discriminate. And as we all know, it is very hard to discern the intent of anyone in our lives, much less a bunch of legislators who are a collection of people actively often trying to hide any real discriminatory intent behind these sort of facially neutral justifications that they're giving, even if we know they're pretextual efforts to just sort of whitewash discriminatory maps. And so in the past, courts also looked at factors, a variety of factors to determine whether or not there was discrimination taking place. And Justice Alito in his update just gave states a blank check to say this was partisan gerrymandering. And because the court has said that partisan gerrymandering is not something the courts will take into account, um, partisan gerrymandering is a perfectly fine justification for redrawing a map any way you want. And if you can say it was partisan gerrymandering, there essentially is no way to prove a discrimination claim. And so it gives them this immediate excuse that they can go to when they're looking for that sort of facially neutral, race neutral explanation. And the court also took away the ability to really look at the history of discrimination in a jurisdiction or in a state, and now relies on looking at current data and current intentional discrimination. We know that the history of discrimination is often an indicator of what those jurisdictions are going to try to do today, but the court denies that reality and says, nope, we're not looking at history. History doesn't matter. We're looking at only evidence from this moment, when we know that a lot of the legislators know the law around this and are much more sophisticated about how they're going to say things. So it's much harder to get that sort of current data to show these things. And through this collection of sort of updates, as Justice Alito called them, we see the bar for making these claims become impossible to meet for anyone who's trying to bring them. So this is a real gutting of Section 2, and is going to be a huge challenge for communities moving forward. And we've already seen, if we can go to the next slide, the states have been racing to make changes. And an analysis by our friends at Black Voters Matter and Fair Fight Action found that the impact of this is going to be huge. So nationally at the congressional level, maybe 19 majority minority districts are at risk. And it's important to remember that we hear about this in the context of the fight for Congress and congressional seats, but the Voting Rights Act protections and these redistricting protections under Section 2 that have now been gutted applied at every level of government. These have been incredibly important in protecting minority voters and making their voice heard in state legislatures, in local commissions and local districting. And so this is a huge loss for them. That is often where this impact will be most intensely felt. And we've seen maybe nearly 150 majority minority districts and state legislatures may be at risk, and countless more at more sort of local levels. So we can go to the next slide. And as I mentioned, they were many of the opponents of voting rights, the people who have been held back by the Voting Rights Act, were just waiting, itching for this decision to come down. That is most true in Florida, where they went ahead and started their redistricting process that they knew would violate the Voting Rights Act even before Callais came down, and were saying publicly, well, we expect Callais to invalidate this, so we're going to go ahead and get this started. And the decision came down as the Senate was in the midst of voting on their bill, on their new maps that were discriminatory and are breaking up some of these minority communities. And so Florida passed a map that day. The governor signed it into law a couple of days later, and Common Cause has already challenged those maps in Florida. We saw in Louisiana, Alabama, Tennessee, South Carolina, all of these states that have historically what we call VRA opportunity districts, these districts that are protected to ensure that minority communities, especially in these southern states, are able to have their voices heard. We've seen them racing to undo those. And in the case of Louisiana, as you see in this last one on the right, the governor actually stopped an ongoing election. 45,000 votes had already been cast in early voting, and he stopped the election with an emergency order, and is trying to redraw the map in order to undo those two districts that we saw at the very beginning of this slide deck, and have a sort of 6-0 Republican majority map that they're able to get passed in that state. So really just unprecedented, unheard of measures like stopping an election in the middle of it. That is how desperate they have been to undo the protections of the VRA, and they have just been waiting to unleash this flurry of new discriminatory maps across the country. And those are states that haven't had their primaries yet, and therefore aren't technically quite as locked into their districts. For 2027 and 2028, we're going to see this on a wider scale across the country. And we'll also see, even in some states that might not be racing to undo the VRA, like California, we may see litigation from opponents of voting rights who are challenging the districts that are in place that protect minority communities, under the logic of Calais, to say that those are sort of unconstitutional in their use of race in redistricting. So it is going to be a continued fight for several years to come. And we are going to see just a flurry of activity for years coming out of this Calais decision. And we're going to see a tremendous loss for minority communities around the country. This has been such a key protection to make sure that they are able to select candidates of their choosing, and it has been completely undone by this court. So we can go to the next slide. Yeah, so I think Mia will talk a little bit about action that you all can take to help fight back against this decision.
First of all, I just want to say thank you so much, Andrew. We really appreciate that, explanation of the severity, the magnitude of the impact of this decision. I know that there was a question in the chat about what this means for Ohio. I don't know if you want to address that or
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about it, and you guys are on the front lines of redistricting in Ohio, so definitely want y'all to chime in too. But I can just say that, this is Ohio is not one of the states that is racing to redraw, like we've seen across the South. There were Republicans got a lot of victories in the map that came out of the process last year, and they're not in the same hurry as some of these southern states to redraw in the wake of Calais. But I think it is important to remember that what happens in these southern states is not limited to these southern states. When we're talking about Congress, we are talking about decisions that affect all of us. When we're talking about Congress, we're talking about representation for minority communities that may be, in Alabama or Louisiana, but is really important for minority communities across the country. And these decisions are going to affect Ohio voters because they are going to affect our the makeup of Congress and who is making decisions in DC. We know that, the Congressional Black Caucus is going to shrink considerably because of the attacks on those communities in the South in particular. And it's not just happening in the South, but especially in the South. So that impact is going to be tremendous, and we're going to feel it as soon as next year across the country. But if you want to talk a little bit
Yeah.
about sort of what we
Well, and
expect in
I
years to come. Yeah.
Yeah, no, Kelly put the link in the chat of the recording of the event that we had on Tuesday night that some of you may have been on. But the I think what Andrew's saying is so important, and both April and Lisa, who spoke, April England Albright and Lisa Graves, said, we don't. It's not that we want to go vote as this ceremonial thing. It has to mean something. The Supreme Court already said, in a case with Common Cause, Rucho v. Common Cause, that they can't do anything about partisan gerrymandering. Now they're saying they can't do anything about racial gerrymandering. So we're telling you, it's so absurd to think you have to have the exact same number of people in each congressional district so there'll be equal representation. And yet, it's fine to make the votes of some people more powerful than others through gerrymandering, through the way that you draw the lines. And so we're really saying the only solution at this point is a federal ban on gerrymandering. There has to be a federal ban on gerrymandering. And even if this Congress is not ready to do that, and this president is not willing to sign that law, we have to start talking about that, and we have to start pushing that, because that's really the only solution that we can have at this point. So this is an action that you can very easily take. I hope everyone on here does, and they tell their friends about it, just to tell Congress, ban partisan gerrymandering, so that we can have votes be meaningful again. Another thing that we are happy to tell you about, people keep joining, so I'm just adding them as we go along. As Andrew said, this is undoing the gains of the civil rights movement. And so the feeling is, we've got to cross that bridge again. We've got to cross that bridge in Selma. We've got to fight those fights again. And even though we're here in Ohio, we're not going to be going to Selma or Montgomery this weekend. We can have solidarity with the folks in the South whose rights are really being taken away. So there are some events that have been put up across the state, and you can find out about them at this link, and we will be sending these out. There's a rally at the State House on Saturday, May 16th, 2 to 4, with Black Voters Matter and the People's Justice Project, and other groups will also be there. So we encourage you to, and even if you don't go out, you can amplify these events on social media. So we encourage you to do that. And then I think we'll move on to the next topic, but we
Oh,
want to,
I had a
yes, Catherine.
question. I had a
Yes,
question for Andrew. Okay,
yes.
so in Columbus, we're talking about kind of our wards and the districts and having those kinds of conversations. And I just wondered about how this decision impacts not just Congress, because, and of course we care about Congress, but also, state legislatures and city councils and, how it impacts all of that across the country.
Yeah, so again, the VRA was a federal level protection, but it applied to all levels of races and districting. And so that is a protection that folks are going to lose at state. It is something that Common Cause has done in a variety of settings. It's challenging, a county level redistricting decision, or a county level districting policy, because it has so negatively impacted a minority community in that county or in that local jurisdiction. And we have relied on the federal VRA to make those challenges. And so this is a loss for those communities as well. Again, we hear about it in the context of Congress, but it is a loss at every level. And it has been such an important protection at every level. And it is something that, there is no way to completely undo Calais. But it is something that in other states where has been the political will in the state legislatures, there have been efforts to pass state level Voting Rights Act to bring those protections from the federal level into state law so that then they are protecting sort of the state level races and the local level races, even if they're not able to shape the congressional race in the same way. And that is an important thing that we've been pushing. We've been able to get those state VRAs passed in Colorado, Minnesota, Maryland just recently. So that is something that I think we'll see a real flurry of activity around the country in trying to push for these. Obviously, it is more challenging in states where there is not that political will in the state legislature. But that is a way that people are fighting back around the country. And I do just want to reemphasize the point that Mia made with that sort of petition on partisan gerrymandering. A central piece throughout every part of Alito's decision in Calais relies on the fact that partisan gerrymandering is okay. There is not a quick and easy way to undo Calais as a whole, but if we are able to get a federal ban on partisan gerrymandering, which we know a majority of Americans support, then that is going to undo so much of the logic of Calais. Calais really relied on, well, if there's another excuse, then we're going to look at that other excuse and we're going to ignore the racial discrimination. And Justice Alito pointed to partisan gerrymandering. He gave a clear roadmap for politicians around the country that want to draw these discriminatory maps of just say it's partisan gerrymandering and you're good. And so if we do get that federal ban on partisan gerrymandering, it's going to rob them of that excuse that they're able to rely on. It's going to undo so much of the logic of Alito's decision in Calais and gives us a chance at, again, seeing some of those protections of the VRA potentially have some force again. So it is, I know a lot of folks are like, oh, well, partisan gerrymandering is separate from racial gerrymandering, but Justice Alito has really linked them so closely here in making it the go-to excuse. And if we're able to get rid of that, that's a huge, huge victory and something that we need to continue to push for.
Yeah, and many people here, we've been working on addressing partisan gerrymandering here in Ohio for, 40 years. The first, citizen initiative was in 1981. So it's been a long haul. We've made some improvements, meaning there is a ban on partisan gerrymandering in the Ohio Constitution. But we ran into problems with the map makers. And so we've just been at this for a while, but it is super clear that we absolutely need to address gerrymandering. And I'm excited to think about it, not just at the state level, but to think about joining with others across the country to push for a national solution, because this has just gone on, and this manipulation of our vote is just disempowering and so, so it's so challenging to kind of keep going and to try to improve democracy if you have this kind of challenge, this kind of like, here, free reign to manipulate you however we want. So as I look forward, yes, we're in a really hard time period, but it's exciting about thinking about moving forward together. And with that, Mia,
I think we thank Andrew so much, and we're going to move on to other horrors happening and other good things.
thank you, Andrew.
Thank
Thank
you,
you
Andrew.
guys. It was a pleasure to
Yep.
join you.
Yep. Catherine.
So I mentioned this at the top where I said, hey, Larry Householder, his appeal was denied by the U.S. Supreme Court. I included this timeline just to remind us. Now, just as a reminder, Larry Householder is Speaker of the House who is now in prison serving his 20 years because of the House Bill 6 scandal, essentially using dark money to advance legislation that was intended to bail out nuclear plants. It did end up subsidizing the coal plants that ended rather recently. When we think about kind of the masterful use of dark money, Larry Householder's name comes up all the time. Now, he appealed, he went through this appeal, and so did Matt Borges, his ally. Matt Borges was the guy who was focused on stopping the referendum of House Bill 6. His appeal with Matt Borges really focused on the fact that they had a First Amendment right to basically say that they were pro-utility and then to get utility money. The argument that it wasn't an explicit quid pro quo specifically for this legislation. Well, they lost their appeal, last year, and just at the end of last month, this U.S. Supreme Court basically denied hearing their appeal. So that is over. And so as we think about this long tail, that it had worried me, this argument that that was their First Amendment right, because I already feel like we in many ways have what approaches a system of legal bribery. But if you really have to act like a Bond villain and say, hey, if I do this, you'll do that, and you had to do it explicitly, we would never be able to stop corruption. And so this is a win for us. I encourage you to check out the House Bill 6 householder timeline when you have a chance. And with that, I'm going to hand it to Mia because we have a new Attorney General.
Yes, so Dave Yost decided that he was done being Attorney General and he wanted to move on to something else. He's going to be working for the Alliance Defending Freedom, which is a conservative Christian group. And you can read all about it in his letter of resignation. And, one possibility that we were contemplating and with some trepidation was that DeWine would essentially do a little merry-go-round and move everybody over to the position that they're running for in Ohio's wonderful tradition of musical chairs, that he would put uh, Faber, who I don't know who's running for what, but the person running for Attorney General, that he would appoint him, and then the person who is, he's now auditor, the person running for auditor, that they would move him so that everyone would be running as an incumbent for this current election. But he opted not to do that, which is kind of wonderful that he didn't. And instead, he appointed Andy Wilson, who was the public safety director. So he's an interim attorney general, and he says that he's not running. So he's not challenging Faber, who's going to be, he is currently running for attorney general in this November's election. We don't know very much about what Andy Wilson will do as attorney general. All he has said at this point is that he's going to take a look at the cases that are currently kind of in the docket, as it were. Sorry, one second. Let me just grab this. There we go. He's going to take a look at the cases and he's going to decide them one by one, what the office of the Attorney General will do going forward. Yeah, and I think Catherine is going to talk about how that may impact cases going forward.
So yes, so there are the state trials and there are more federal. So the thing to know about this is that Andy Wilson said that he was going to review all of the different cases that the Attorney General has been responsible for, and that does include the ones that surround the House Bill 6 first energy litigation. Just last month, Chuck Jones and Mike Dowling, they had a hung jury. So these are the first energy executives. They are accused of bribing Sam Randazzo. Sam Randazzo became the chair of the Public Utilities Commission and really fostered House Bill 6, but also did some other things that benefited First Energy. The trial, ended up in a hung jury, but at the moment they are scheduled to do a retrial in September. But keep in mind, it kind of depends on what it is that the new attorney general decides to do. The other thing to remember is that there is a trial set for June 8th. Larry Householder is, this is state charge again, where Larry Householder is accused of using campaign finance, the funds that he had in, his campaign cash to defend himself. Now, as far as I can tell, it won't be hard to prove because it's literally in the campaign finance reports. So, I just really wanted to highlight it. This seems like one of the things that they would not to neglect to pursue, but I wanted to highlight that this was a possibility. Also, there are still some pending things surrounding the federal charges for Chuck Jones and Mike Dowling. You'll remember, we talked about Larry Householder and Matt Borges. Neil Clark died as a result of suicide. He was charged at that time. And then Juan Cespedes, who has pled guilty but has not faced sentencing at this point. So that's what's up with the continuing saga of House Bill 6 and First Energy. Any questions? And then we'll just move ahead, unless there's
Yeah.
something you wanted to add, Mia.
No, I think I'm going to move ahead to I think Kelly, is it this slide you want or?
Well, I think the next slide was just talking about the articles that Catherine had. Yeah, that one.
Oh, okay, very good. So this is some of the articles.
Well, did you want to? I can do the voting first.
Yeah,
So,
great.
just as a quick voting update, we held the election on May 5th. It is still in progress as county boards of elections cure the ballots, but overall, there were over 1.7, almost 1.8 million ballots cast. We have almost 7.9 million registered voters. Sorry, these are in millions of voters registered across the state, so it was about a 22% turnout. We run the elections with these, just thousands of precincts, and so there were over 8,800 precincts. So we wanted to thank everyone who is a poll worker. We know many of you on this call worked the polls, turned out as election protection volunteers, got information out into your communities about good voting updates and laws and deadlines. And so we really appreciate all the efforts to help support voters. This week, the boards of elections are curing the provisional ballots and the military ballots that were allowed to be received 4 days after Election Day if they were postmarked ahead of time. And so we are waiting on those final counts. The boards of elections will be working this week and into next week to certify their counts and make sure everything is wrapped up in time by May 26th to send that off to the Secretary of State. And we will continue to monitor that. We also thank our boards of elections monitors that are on this call that help go to those local meetings and learn about what's happening at our county boards so we can report back to everyone else. We do have a poll worker debrief we've done for the past few elections. I will drop it in a second, but on May 19th, which is next week, Tuesday at noon, if you were a poll worker and you wanted to hop on and share stories at the county level, we really learned quite a bit from the poll workers and get to hear about how different counties are handling the elections. It's a fascinating call for any poll workers there. We'd love to have you. And I think we'll report out next meeting with how the election turnout was finalized and certification went. But thank you again, everyone who had a role to play in the election.
Kelly, there's a couple of questions in the chat. Janine, I don't think we have the figures yet on the percentage of Ds
I
and
just
Rs.
threw it into I
Oh, you
just
did.
threw it into
Okay.
the chat.
Awesome. And then one from Karen Lee. Do the military ballots include the civilian contingent of UOCAVA? And do we have a number breakout for the two types?
I don't personally have that yet. So, we are working to working to get that information, as the boards of elections hold these meetings. We're also looking at getting counts on how many ballots that were postmarked before election day were received within the 4-day window for Ohioans who also mailed those in, and under the previous law would have been counted. So we can update that information, and I'll just make a note to include that breakdown when we meet next time.
And Arthur's comment, 22%. Yes, what a mess. Because we know in Ohio the primary is really so important because the majority of congressional races, state house races, they're basically decided in the primary. And so the folks who decide to vote in the primary are the ones that are making the real decisions. And the ones that go in November are just kind of saying, yeah, right. So that's just so important. And I also wanted to really encourage you, if you know anyone who worked as a poll worker, please share this link with them. I think Kelly's going to drop it in the chat now to sign up for the poll worker debrief. We were monitoring some discussions happening on social media, and there was a post in Reddit about someone in a very rural red county went in to vote. And of course, in the primary, you have to say what ballot you want. You have to say whether you want a Republican, Democratic, Libertarian, or issues only ballot. And what they were doing, what the poll worker was doing, was when the person said what ballot they wanted, the poll worker was shouting that across the room to the person on the other side, who would then pick the ballot and give it to them. And in that rural area, if you were pulling a Democratic ballot, having it shouted across the room for all of your neighbors, to hear, might have been an issue. And in other counties, they just show you a screen and you touch the ballot that you want, and it's all quiet. And so there's a lot of different. We have 88 counties, and they run their elections very differently. And so having a place where poll workers can come together and discuss the issues that they faced and the things that were problematic is really, really important. And we hope that you can help us gather poll workers from everywhere so that we can have a great discussion. And going on, these were the articles that
So, one of the things that I always feel a little bad about when we do these kind of coffee with common cause is there's so many different topics, and I just wanted to throw out some of the things that we've recently read that struck me as something to take some time to read and digest. I found the shadow papers, and I realize this is from, April, so it would have been right after we did our last coffee with Common Cause. I was just like that. Basically, it's a dive into like what are the memos, what are the records about the shadow docket, and so many more decisions are made by the U.S. Supreme Court in a way where we can't actually get their reasoning. And so I found that completely fascinating and kind of encourage folks to check it out. The other thing that I didn't include this in all the householder updates, but the Ohio Supreme Court did decide that AEP can keep the money, $75 million, that they can keep the money for that they garnered from the House Bill 6. House Bill 6 provided subsidies for the coal plants, and so the one in Ohio and one in Indiana, that AEP is going to get to keep this money. And so it's just incredibly sad. We can all see how corrupt the bill was. It's clear there were significant problems at the Public Utilities Commission. We are, more than 6 years out, and we're still feeling the consequences. One of the things that Janine, do you want to jump in and let people know what you think about this? So Janine is a former consumer counsel.
Yeah, there is a law, there's a decision, the Kiko decision, which basically says that if a decision at the Supreme Court is overturned, the utilities do not have to refund the amount of money that they collected from the time the decision went in effect and the time of the Supreme Court decision. OCC has repeatedly, including in my term and many other Consumer Council terms, tried to get that changed at the legislature. And in fact, in the court decision, they actually said, to fix this, we need a legislative fix. And I gave that to the legislature when I testified and said, you need to fix this. But the utility lobby is very strong because obviously they want to keep the money that they've garnered unjustly from consumers, and they don't want to have to refund what could be, in some cases, hundreds of millions of dollars. So that's where we are. We need a legislative fix.
Which
For
is a
that
bit
and
of an
many
uphill
things.
battle,
Yeah.
but well, this sounds like, long-term planning, and let's get this done. I think
Well,
consumers are really feeling it and are more aware and talking about the implications of the costs of utilities and what this actually means.
well, I know the current Consumers Counsel, Maureen Willis, would be more than happy
Mhm.
to have support from coalitions to try to get this done. This has been on the radar of myself, Bruce Weston, and then Maureen. So,
Well, and Denise, did you want to jump in and talk about the confusing ballot language in Richland County?
I can, but I really only know what I read in the papers, and it
That
really,
is
really.
okay. Why don't you tell us what you read in the paper?
Okay, so what I read in the paper is that if you don't know, the Richland County had a ban that shadily was put on by the county commissioners for any renewable energy projects in the county. So like you couldn't have a large scale wind farm or solar farm. And so the county banned it, and they the citizens badgered the county to put it to a vote
Hmm.
instead of them just making this unanimous decision. And so the language on the ballot is so confusing that even I would have voted the wrong way. So a no vote was to remove the ban, and a yes vote, no, wait, it's the other way around. A yes vote was to, see, I'm still confused. A yes vote was to remove the ban, and a no vote was to keep the ban. But the language said, shall this, and the language was really long, but it said, shall this ban be approved? So it looks like you're saying, no, we don't want this
Right.
ban, we'll vote no, but it was the yes vote that was supposed to remove said ban. And exit polling suggested that, and it narrowly failed. Exit polling suggested that the confusing ballot language was the main factor in why it failed.
Mhm. And we certainly know that purposely confusing ballot language, and we can go back to 2024 and citizens, not politicians, it's horrifying to have the right to do direct democracy, but have the kinds of manipulations that make it so that it dilutes our vote. We had an interesting yesterday was the fair democracy huddle, and we focused on direct democracy. So one of the things we can do when we do our follow up is we can share the slides for that as well, and the recording, so that you have that if that wasn't one you attended and you have kind of an interest in direct democracy. We were happy that the folks from the Ballot Initiative Strategy Center were able to join us, and then Protect Ohio Ballots as well. So highly encourage you to check that out. The other thing that there was one other thing, I'm sorry, that I did want to highlight, which are the last two. One had to do with that look inside the case that enshrined political power for billionaires. And you might think this is going to be all about Citizens United, but it's about Buckley versus Vallejo. And that was the decision following so you had Watergate, you had the reforms. In 1976, the U.S. Supreme Court considered whether the reforms were constitutional. So, and they've determined that it was constitutional to have contribution limits, but not constitutional to have spending limits, because money is the, like the gas that makes the car go, and you would be limiting people's free speech. And so that is actually interesting to think about. Well, what happened, in 1976, 50 years ago, that then led up over time to us essentially equating money and speech. And what, obviously we're living with the consequences of that, but it's interesting to go back and look at it. And I highly encourage you to do that. And then the other one is a blog post by our colleague Jessica Dickinson about the changing rules of the Ohio Supreme Court, where they now are permitted to endorse other candidates. And then there is an ad that, in my mind, shows the natural consequences of, not highlighting to judges that they need to be as impartial as possible and thoughtful in their political speech. So check that out. And then if other people have things that they've read recently that they really want to share, please, pop them into the chat. And, we will distribute more broadly. And with that, Mia?
Yes, Susan, were you coming off mute for perhaps not? Okay, Kelly.
Yes. This is a couple months out, but we just want to get it on everyone's calendars. If you're interested, we will be having our third annual Election Protection Summit in Columbus. This is a day on September 12th. We will be getting together for the bulk of the day to talk through election protection, hear from great motivating speakers, train up a little bit and prepare for the upcoming election, and meet fellow advocates and partners across the state. So it's a great time. Lunch will be provided, but we encourage you now, if you'd like to sign up at the registration link, and we'll keep you updated on plans as they near. Thanks.
And Kelly, Dan is asking, how can you sign up to be a poll monitor?
So the best way to get in the loop right now is go to protectthevote.net, and you can register there. I'll drop the link.
I got it.
Okay, thank you. And that will get you into the system to start getting emails from us, and hear of upcoming events and how we will rally for the fall election. Thanks.
Awesome. And just a few upcoming events. We have every other week, we have a Ohio Voter Rights Coalition meeting at noon, and we have one coming up on Friday. They're the solidarity events that we spoke about that are on Saturday. There's the Great Ohio Climate March is May 16th to 28th. I think that registering to march is closed, but there are going to be events all across the state as the folks kind of progress from Athens all the way up to Columbus, and there'll be a rally on the 28th in Columbus. So more information at that link. There's the poll worker debrief we spoke about. States at the Core is doing a Smash Authoritarianism summer camp, which sounds very cool. We are having our next coffee on June 25th. And then, of course, there's the Election Protection Summit. So I think that's about it. Anything else we need to mention, or are there questions or comments that folks have?
Well, I should highlight the Smash Authoritarianism is virtual. So in case you were trying to say, okay, I don't know that I want to take a whole week, and it is the kind of thing where you can pop in and out, and lots of good opportunities to learn.
And Chris, who was asking about the flock cameras, if you can either put your email in the chat or email me, that would be great. And I think there was a second person who was also interested. So I will grab that info from the chat. And thank you guys so much for being here early in the morning, and for your dose of hard reality, but also some things we can do together to make things better. And we appreciate
Mhm.
being together with you guys.
Well, thank you all. And I have to tell you, whenever I get up early in the morning, my brain doesn't work as well as it should, but I'm always happy to get up for coffee with Common Cause because it's that opportunity to see everyone and think about how do we approach this in community. And I just really wanted to say a great big thank you and a big thank you to people who were poll workers and poll monitors and who are getting ready for the upcoming election in November. A big thank you to you all and just enjoy your day. I'm so glad Andrew was able to join us and provide that overview because I think it's both complicated and helps us really understand what the lay of the land is. Kelly, anything you wanted to add?
Nope, just hope everyone has a great day and we will see you next month.
All right, be well. Oh,
Thanks,
if you have
guys.
topics for next time, send me a note. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Be well.
Bye.
Oh, Sandy just noted that Democracy Now! Amy Goodman has a film at the Gateway Theater. Well worth, well worth going to. All
Great.
right, thank you, everybody. Be well.
Bye.